This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Coming up in this episode of Real Talk, journalist and aid worker Porter Robbins joins us. She's spent a ton of time in Gaza and the West Bank, and she's just back, as a matter of fact. Earlier this year, she was over there in particular working with healthcare workers, and she's going to provide us some unique insights on what's happening there. She's written for The New Yorker. You may have read her work in The Atlantic, The Globe and Mail. Basically, the point is she's published everywhere in all the big outlets, because she's got unique insights into what's happening over there with the people on the ground, healthcare workers that are still in those hospitals, healthcare workers that have stuck around because they know that their services are desperately needed. Claire has a unique insight that she's going to share with us on this episode, one you certainly will not want to miss. The episode is happening with the support of Relo, Alberta's top real estate school. People are choosing careers in real estate because they love the flexibility. They love the fact that there's unlimited earning potential. They can work for themselves. And quite frankly, when you work in real estate, commercial or residential, you're helping people. You're helping people buy or sell in a situation where you know they're looking for that perfect fit. And Relo's team of experienced instructors can help you get there, from preparing through the courses to writing your exam, getting certified, and then beyond. As you establish your own real estate business, Relo has you covered. And there's a special discount code right now for Real Talkers, which makes it an even better time to get signed up. If you use the discount code Ryan100, they're going to knock $100 off the Alberta Residential Real Estate Bundle and the Alberta Commercial Real Estate Bundle. So you're covered for residential and commercial when you use the promo code Ryan100. That's all one word at relo.ca. Porter Robbins is a freelance journalist and an aid worker, originally from Calgary, Alberta. She's worked in the Middle East, including Gaza and the West Bank, the Balkans as well. Her writing on the conflict has appeared, as mentioned, in The Atlantic, in The New Yorker, in the Globe and Mail. She's making her Real Talk debut this morning. Claire, thank you so much for making time for us.
Hi, thanks, Ryan. Good morning.
Good morning to you. You're basically just back. What was it, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, something like that? You were over?
Sorry, I was in Jerusalem last month and went to some places in the West Bank, but I worked in Gaza in 2022 with a healthcare NGO. I'm no longer with them, but I got quite a bit of experience and understanding of the healthcare system there when I was there in 2022.
Okay, so we'll be clear. You're not here speaking on behalf of Doctors Without Borders, but that's who you were doing work with back in 2022. Just so we understand your perspective, the lens through which you're seeing all of this, can you tell us about the work that you were doing over there?
Sure. So I was a communications advisor, and Doctors Without Borders has a number of projects in the West Bank and Gaza to support a health infrastructure that's been really degraded over years of occupation, over years of war. So lots of mental health projects for people in the West Bank that are facing settler violence and displacement, forcible displacement. And then in Gaza, there was lots of programs for things like supporting surgical capacity, burn care, other things that happen in places where there's, a blockade that stops certain specialists from getting in, or certain equipment, and also a context where lots of the health effects are caused by poverty. So everything is sort of mixed together, the social, the health, and I supported that by writing stories about our patients, about our doctors, and I was there for about a year in between Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank.
And for you personally, what was that like? Where was your head at before you headed over there? How much did you know about it, and what sort of impression was made upon you during your time there? I would imagine it was obviously pretty significant for a number of reasons.
Yeah. I think, I've talked about it before. I'd worked as an aid worker in Jordan, responding to the Syrian crisis, and also in Kosovo, which is, a frozen conflict. And I had known about those things from the news, from school. The Syrian revolution started in 2011 when I was in high school. We talked a lot about it. And I remember the Alberta curriculum at that time really covered, I thought it was quite good, a range of things about um, genocide, ethnic cleansing. We talked about the Holocaust, Rwanda, conflicts in Yugoslavia. We even talked about things that are more contentious to some people, like Armenia. But we never really discussed Israel-Palestine. So anything that I knew about it before going in was just reading. There are some great NGOs like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty that have covered the occupation, but I really didn't. I consider myself sort of an informed person. I didn't know too much going in.
That's probably, would you agree? I mean, I certainly don't speak for anybody besides myself, but if we're being honest, that's probably the position that most Canadians are in. Not that there's not millions of people that aren't interested in learning more and trying to level up their understanding of it and really trying to understand the nuance here and the history and the implications. But for the most part, I've found, to speak candidly, when people look at what's happening in the Middle East, it's almost like people shake their heads. It seems like a lot of people are afraid to comment on it because they either don't want to offend somebody, or they don't feel like they understand it totally, or they just don't want to get involved. And it just sort of seems like, even for a lot of people, when we talk about even before like October 7th and then Israel's response and what's happening now, it seemed like a lot of people were sort of taking a position of there will just never be peace in the Middle East. And almost as North Americans, we just kind of shrug it off in a way.
Right. Yeah. I know it's too bad. I think we've been taught for a long time, and I think the curriculum says that Israel-Palestine is too complicated for us to know about, for us to weigh in. And I understand that's because there's a ton of pain behind that, a ton of really, really emotional events for people. But the fact is, we're in Canada. Our government supports Israel. Our government also contributes quite a lot to this goal of building a second or a two-state solution, a Palestinian state. So we as a country are very politically invested in this conflict. So it's not really right for us to feel that we have no stake. There will never be peace in the Middle East. We can't weigh in. I think there are ways to learn and educate ourselves and learn more about the pain that people have experienced in this conflict and how our government is deciding to react to that.
Just checking out doctorswithoutborders.ca again to reiterate, you're not here on behalf of the organization. Yeah. I do see a piece though published back in October of 2022. The headline,
I wrote that.
Yeah, it comes up on a Google search with your name. Healthcare workers in Gaza confront stress on the front lines. What was one of the first things you noticed, or what was most obvious when you arrived in that part of the world and started taking stock of the state of healthcare there and the workers delivering it?
I'm glad you pulled that up because I think something that we haven't really reckoned with is the fact that Gaza was in an untenable situation before this war on October 7th, before these horrible attacks. People were incredibly psychologically suppressed, suffering due to the blockade. And I think there was some stat like in the last 15 years, there'd been 5 wars. So if you had a 15-year-old child, they'd lived through 5 wars. And that's just not a healthy environment. And for healthcare workers, the ones that I worked with, they're incredibly resilient, incredibly strong, but it's not healthy. It's not right for them to have to be making these horrible, sort of terrible choices and living with that sort of stress of constant war. I can share with you a personal anecdote because I think that's the best way to illustrate these things. One of my good friends is a doctor in Gaza, and she works in a burn clinic and is a general practitioner with some specializations, but mostly works in general practitioner. role, and she's got 3 young children, and they live in Gaza City. So on, I think it was around October 10th, they were told to evacuate. They were forcibly displaced to southern Gaza, not quite Rafah. But they've been living in sort of an informal shelter there since. Her husband is a surgeon. At this point, there are only 3 vascular surgeons left in Gaza because of war and because it's incredibly hard to gain those sort of specializations in such a closed environment. So she was working a bit during this war, and he was working full time at Nasser Hospital, which is in Khan Yunis, which is approximately the middle area. And he was operating day in, day out. He barely took any breaks. And then in February, the Israeli army started to enclose upon Nasser Hospital. And he had colleagues at al-Shifa, at other hospitals that had been enclosed upon by the army and had gone missing or passed away. Or sorry, passed away is not the right word, being killed. So he had to make the choice: do I stay with my patients? There are no other vascular surgeons. This is a conflict where many people need that sort of help for amputations and for other sorts of catastrophic injuries. Or do I go home to my wife and children? And these are the sort of decisions that everyday families in Gaza are making. Do I stay and help my community, or do I go back and stay with my family and hope that we survive through the next night? And I'm sure people have seen the news. Nasser Hospital, he left, and mass graves have been discovered at Nasser Hospital. Some of those bodies may have been people who passed away from their injuries, but other bodies have been found with their hands tied behind their backs. And this is the reality of what's happening right now. And these are just ordinary people who are trying to make choices from day to day to ensure their family's survival, to ensure their patients' survival. That's the sort of psychological stress that people are dealing with right now, but it existed before.
You wrote about how it existed before. You wrote about it in October for the Globe and Mail, right? On the Gaza Strip, forms of punishment, permanent features of everyday life. You write about another friend of yours. Would you tell us about Ruba and Reem, her daughter, 2.5 years old at the time you wrote this? I guess about 3 now.
Yeah, so that's actually the same family.
Oh, it's the same family. Pardon me.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's been fortunate. I've been in quite a good level of communication with her. There are times when there's no Wi-Fi, or cell service, but we've been able to stay in touch. They're currently deciding as a family, do they try and evacuate? How would they do that? And
yeah, Claire, can I ask you, like, what are the options there? Like, if families are saying, yeah, we're out of here, it's not as simple as like driving to the airport and hopping on a flight, right?
Yeah, it's extremely complicated, and I'm just going to sort of glaze over the nuance of it, but it's approximately $5,000 per person to a company that is related to the Egyptian government, related to the dictator of Egypt, and about $5,000 per person, and you have to have someone in Egypt willing to take out that amount of cash, but there's a currency crisis, so you can't take out more than a couple thousand at a time. Then you have to wait in line physically, and then that might get you a spot on a wait list that's about 6 weeks long. But even just for one person, $5,000 is astronomical for Gazans. It's an extremely corrupt system. But it's people's only chance of getting out. Ruba, her son is, unfortunately, he had a congenital eye condition that he was being treated for before the war. and he was supposed to receive regular treatment, and he hasn't been able to access that since the war started. I mean, their general health has really declined, and he's started to lose vision in his eye. So they're on, I believe it's a medical evacuation list with the Gulf. A country in the Gulf does some sort of air evacuation for children. But I think it's like an 18-week waiting list. So, yeah.
What were you doing in Jerusalem when you were just recently there?
Yeah, I was there to do some reporting. I have been working on a story, again, health focused. So one thing people don't really realize is that before the war, certain types of chemotherapy, specialist surgery, diagnostics were not available in Gaza because of the blockade, because of poverty. So if you had cancer, you would apply sometimes to go get treatment in Israel or in Jerusalem. And so on October 7th, and that's not a guarantee. I think only 70% of those permits are accepted. But on October 7th, there were some children, and I mean, my story is focusing on the children, but there were about 90 patients in Jerusalem on October 7th who have been stuck there ever since. They're from Gaza, and they haven't been able to go back. And so the Israeli government is currently pursuing a court case to deport them back to Gaza. And so some of the children that I was profiling are terminal. And the government is trying to send them back to Gaza where there's no palliative care. Fortunately, an Israeli human rights NGO called Physicians for Human Rights has stepped in and sort of delayed that court case and is advocating for them. But that was what I was covering while I was there. That article should be out in the coming weeks. The court case is deliberating right now. Yeah, it was an extremely emotional trip, and to meet those amazing patients, these young patients, they're, especially their mothers, they're having such a hard time coping with their child's serious and sometimes terminal illness. And then on the other hand, they haven't seen their children for 6 months, and they're in Gaza, and they're not getting enough to eat. So it was a very intense reporting trip for me. I also got to witness Palm Sunday and Purim, so moments of joy in the Holy Land. But overall, I would say the mood there, the Jerusalem that I know, it's quite dampened by this war. There's reminders of the hostages everywhere, the government's inability to bring them home, Hamas's crimes. There's reminders of the famine that people in Gaza are experiencing everywhere. It's definitely a very different Jerusalem at the moment.
Huh. Yeah, I mean the entire region. We had a friend of mine, a personal friend of mine from high school that lives in Israel now with her family, raising her family there. She's works at a university, and spoke with her just a couple of days after October 7th, and got her perspective on this. And I was just in touch with her a couple of days ago. It was her birthday. It's obviously Passover. Like there's a lot going on, and just hearing from her, I won't read her message, but it was just like, parents are trying to like have some normalcy, I guess, and in this entire region. Like, let me just, before I get to the rest of this, like there's a comment here from Kathy on our live chat who says, being so far removed from the actual conflict zone, people sometimes forget that these are actual real humans that are suffering for political and religious ideals. Yeah. And that like parents, especially with young kids, are trying to like have some element of normalcy, but how do you in a region that is like just so conflict ridden, and I don't want to say the word hopeless, but you look at it, and I can't imagine what you feel there being on the ground. How does being there and talking to these people and seeing what you're seeing influence you? Like when you come back, I would imagine you're more motivated to tell the stories, but like you said as well, there's an emotional, psychological impact too on the storyteller.
Yeah. I mean, I try not to focus too much on me because I'm not there. Like
Hmm.
I'm not the one experiencing these, but I do get. I've been fortunate to stay in touch with my friends there. I woke up to a text this morning from this great guy. His name is Yusuf. He's an occupational therapist. He actually adjusted my glasses for me because they kept sliding off my face. So I think about him every time I put them on. And he texted me today. He said, how are you? What are you working on? And I said, I'm fine. What's going on? And he said, well, we've been in a tent for five months now, and I'm starting to lose my dignity. Um, so yeah, it's just really hard. And then there are no words. We have such a wonderful life in Canada in so many respects, and then to think about people who are not receiving the bare minimum of food, water, um, warmth. It's really hard, especially when you have a personal connection with these people. Um, I saw a report the other day by Save the Children, and it was rewritten up by Human Rights Watch about starvation and about two children who had passed away from starvation at a hospital that I used to work at as a communications professional. But I've been in that pediatric ward. I can imagine the children there and their families. It's Al Auda Hospital in northern Gaza. So yeah, I don't have. I go to therapy. I don't have a solution for this sort of grief because it's enduring, and it's hard when it's you don't see um, concrete action being taken to prevent that starvation or prevent those bombs from falling or see a peace deal being pursued more vigorously. It's very difficult.
Yeah, you wrote a piece recently, like this month, for the Globe and Mail, where you basically you touch on the killings of aid workers there, the World Kitchen
Mm.
workers,
Yeah,
which I think people are maybe familiar with if they've been paying close attention. But I liked your take on it, which is just pleading with people,
yeah.
in particular Western governments, to not look away. Can you
Mhm.
take us into that?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that because the World Central Kitchen killings, when we heard about it, I was with a bunch of journalists in Jerusalem when we thought, is this going to change anything? Because these are Western passports. These are military veterans. These are um, white people who are sort of valorized in our society, and they are being killed just like 200 other Palestinian aid workers. But finally, there's headlines about this. And the reality is, what I tried to focus on in this piece is they were killed because there's no reliable process for deconfliction. Deconfliction essentially means aid convoys, aid sites, hospitals, those should be protected sites. And how that works is so, for example, if you are a World Central Kitchen convoy, and this is what they did, they call the Israeli commanders and say, this is our car, this is what it looks like, these are our GPS coordinates, this is when we're leaving, this is when we're coming. And you call quite frequently. I don't know what the standard is. When I've done it before, you're calling like every hour. Although I'm sure in this context it was more. But the reality is, those sort of ambulances, food convoys, those have been getting bombed for 6 months, and Palestinian aid workers have been dying. And that's been stopping food from getting to the north and medical supplies from getting to the north and other parts of Gaza, is because aid organizations cannot guarantee the safety, even though they're calling the Israeli government and saying, this is where we're going, this is needed supplies. It's not guaranteed. So um, the Canadian government asked for an independent investigation and said that they're concerned. But the reality is, this has been going on for 6 months. And, untold numbers of people have died because aid organizations have decided that it's not worth the risk of their workers being killed and their vehicles being absolutely destroyed. Though the World Central Kitchen killings were successive strikes, and the people in that vehicle were security professionals. So they followed exactly the protocol. They were in the marked vehicles. They'd shared their coordinates. When the first one was struck, they got out. They ran into the second vehicle. It was struck. They got out. They ran into the third vehicle. It was struck. And that's, to just ask for an independent investigation, to me, is not sufficient.
What do you think would be a more appropriate course of action?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I think Canada needs to be thinking more seriously about how our partnership with Israel needs to be leveraged in order to allow actual aid to get through, and that aid workers, humanitarian sites, hospitals, their safety and the safety of humanitarian workers, doctors, nurses is guaranteed.
We've got a comment here from 80s Fanify in the live chat who says, like, not to mention journalists in Palestine as well. You shared a photo with us. I'm assuming this is Shireen Abu Akleh, correct?
Yes.
The journalist that was killed by IDF troops, and the number of journalists killed in this conflict is staggering.
That's a mural, a photo I took in Gaza. But Shireen Abu Akleh was killed in Nablus, in Jenin, which is in the West Bank, which has been subject to a ton of incursions into the hospital there. I believe Doctors Without Borders has a project in the hospital there right now. But if we can talk about the West Bank, that would be great, because I feel like Gaza's in the news, and rightfully so, but the West Bank has really been erupting, and Canada actually plays sort of a bigger role in the West Bank.
Absolutely, and in particular, I want to ask you about an experience you had. It sounded to me like you were witnessing some Israelis that are there trying to help Palestinians, and there was some shepherds involved in this. We'll get to that story with Claire Porter Robbins in just a moment. Joining us live from Calgary, where she's just back, as you heard, from covering the Israel-Hamas war, a freelance journalist and aid worker formerly with Doctors Without Borders, and obviously a solid grasp of what's happening over there. I like this comment from Erica in our live chat. Says, boy, is it ever refreshing to hear a guest that's actually about the people, not trying to play politics. Kudos to her. I think there is a place to talk about politics here, and I'm going to ask Claire for her take on what's happening in Canada on Parliament Hill, maybe how Israel got to this point, maybe developments with the Palestinian Authority over the past number of years. I do think there's a real desire for people to gain better understanding. But Erica, I take your point, and that's one of the big reasons why we've been looking forward to this conversation with Claire, is because she's there on the ground talking to the real people. I mean, talking to vascular surgeons that are sticking around because their services, their expertise is so desperately needed because of the grim reality. But even there, the workplace not even safe, to say the least. More with Claire Porter Robbins in just a moment. I want to give a shout out quickly to our Real Talk patrons, our Patreon supporters, those of you that make interviews like this possible. We sure appreciate you. We got an amazing email about our partners at Complete Care Restoration. This from Neil just the other day. Neil wrote in and said, Jespo, I wanted to let you know about an experience I had with Complete Care Restoration. We had a freezer ice maker malfunction. Says we were obviously very concerned about moisture under the floorboards. I sent Complete Care Restoration an email, and Kelly there had responded with an incredibly thorough email within 24 hours. I don't think Kelly will mind me pointing out, he's the owner of the company. This guy's responding to these emails within 24 hours. He put my mind at ease, says Neil, offered to come out free of charge to do some testing, to advise us on the best course of action. I am so impressed with their prompt response, their professionalism, the thoroughness of their response to my simple request for advice. What a first-class company. That from Neil. There you go. You can find more at CompleteCareRestoration.ca. Our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy want you to know that right now they've got office locations in Calgary, Edmonton, Lethbridge, and Kamloops, and they're hiring for all of them. You can find out more at the career links at kubienergy.ca, rapidly expanding across Western Canada, and they need your help to bring solar savings to communities across Alberta and BC. They're looking for solar PV designers, residential sales representatives, administrative staff. Kubi's commitment to continuous improvement drives them to pioneer advancements in the solar industry, and they're making significant strides toward a sustainable future, you can send them an email to julie.m@kubyenergy.ca, or just check out the careers link and contact them from there. And did you know, coming up on the 27th of April, did you know that it's Prime Rib Day? Yeah, that's right. Our friends at Friesen Brothers want to make sure you know that National Alberta Beef Prime Rib Day is coming up Saturday, April 27th, and of course, they're celebrating it. Alberta Beef Prime Rib, expertly hand-cut by Friesen Brothers master butchers using the finest, freshest Alberta beef. And if you visit a Friesen Brothers on April 27th, they're also going to make sure that your kids get balloons. Their Smart Shopper programs are going to be entered to win. Those of you that are signed up, an exclusive $500 Made in Alberta prize pack at every Friesen Brothers store. If you want more information, check out friesen.com/Prime Rib Day. Claire Porter Robbins, our guest. If you're just joining us, live streaming the audio on the Mixlr app, presented by California Closets, a freelance journalist, aid worker, who's worked in the Middle East for quite some time. She's just back, was in Jerusalem. Can you talk to us about what you saw, in particular in the West Bank? It looks like there's some stuff happening there involving Israelis looking to protect Palestinians that I'm not sure everybody knows about.
Sure. It's a very interesting thing. So I'll start by explaining. I was invited by a group of Israeli leftists. They're called Mothers Against Violence, and they're all women in their 50s and 60s. They're very anti-occupation. They're all Israeli Jewish women. Sorry, I'm just plugging my computer in. And they invited me because they were bringing Ramadan care packages to people in Masafer Yatta, which is an area of an area of the West Bank outside Hebron, people are facing serious displacement and serious settler violence. And so they invited me along. There was a group of Arab Israeli women who came along in a separate car too, to bring food in our vehicle and medicine and other things in the other vehicle. The soldiers at the border stopped the Israeli Arab women from entering the West Bank. They made them turn around. But they allowed the convoy of Israeli Jewish women in. There's one of them you can see on the screen. Fairly shortly after we got into Masafer Yatta, we saw up on the hills some shepherd women, some Palestinian shepherd women who were seated, about 3 or 4 of them, I believe, surrounded by about 10 masked soldiers. The women I was with approached, and there were already 3 young Israeli activists there, and they're known as Protective Presence, and they are in these areas of the West Bank. They volunteer to monitor and document harassment and human rights abuses against Palestinians by settlers and by the Israeli army and police. And so these women were being arrested because supposedly their sheep had crossed over into Israeli state land. The maps apparently didn't check out. I didn't look at the maps myself, but it was quite heated. And the soldiers were yelling at the activists, "How could you be doing this when our men are getting slaughtered in Gaza?" The political situation is incredibly intense, and I think that day sort of proved it. The West Bank has really, really, really been erupting since October 7th, without much attention to it. And part of the reason is that during this war, extremist settlers have been given more leeway to establish settlements, to harass Palestinians, and the military and the police have sort of allowed that to happen. I think this is an interesting time to talk about the Canadian military presence in the West Bank. We have a mission called Operation Proteus, and we contribute to the United States Security Coordinator. Our role is to train and monitor the security situation in the West Bank. And we also train the Palestinian Authority's security forces for the state that they are supposed to have, according to Oslo, in however many years. So the Canadian government is actually very attuned to what's going on here. And you might have seen that the Canadian government's announced sanctions against settlers in, I believe it was February. It's not clear whether those have been followed through with, but since then, many of these settlers now wear masks, as you see in the video, when they are harassing or destroying property, because in Canada and in Europe, our bar legally for sanctions is so high, there has to be a ton of proof. We need to be able to see the faces. And now they're just masked. They're getting around it through that. But the situation in the West Bank is incredibly intense. I had a Canadian military officer tell me that this is the most amount of violence in the West Bank since the intifadas. It's actually more than the intifadas, but it's quite intense right now. And Canada is contributing a ton to training Palestinian security forces and doing things like building courthouses, renovating courthouses, training legal aid. But the reality is we're still operating within the confines of an Israeli occupation that allows these this sort of military law to happen. Something that's important to point out is for those Palestinian shepherd women, they are subject to Israeli military law because it's considered still an emergency state for 57 years. Whereas the settlers or any other Israeli who is in that territory who is arrested would be subject to civil law. So the fact is, those those shepherd women could be detained without charge for an indefinite period of time, and thousands of people are without charge. So this is the sort of system that Canada is working within, supporting justice initiatives, but not actually confronting the sort of root structural problems.
Claire, can you talk to us, like, your impression, your take, obviously an informed take on what you've seen for, in this sense of where politics are going in Israel, in particular, maybe with Netanyahu's future. And I've read and been listening to podcasts, differing opinions on what his future looks like. Some people believe he's set to lose an election. Other people believe that recent developments could contribute, could provide some staying power for him. What you see for support for Hamas in the region, maybe what you've seen with the erosion of the Palestinian Authority, and ultimately, if you think that there's any room for pro-peace discourse at all.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel we're so much farther away from peace than 30 years ago when this sort of roadmap for peace was set out in Oslo. In terms of Israeli politics, I can't quite remember when the next election will be, but Netanyahu sort of secured himself a very tight coalition of very extreme far right-wing people. And that's what's keeping him in power. And the war has only made those people more popular. I believe the statistics back that up, because in times of insecurity, people tend to go for those sort of law and order, very harsh sort of politicians. And it's the same thing right now. I know support for Hamas was quite minimal in the West Bank. Hamas doesn't exist in the West Bank politically, but I think it was below 10% before October 7th, and it's risen. And that just shows the amount of polarization that is happening on the Israeli and the Palestinian sides. The alternative for Palestinians politically, or not the alternative, but the current system is Mohammed Abbas. He's been in power for a long time now. I'm not sure exactly when, and he has little to no political support, or popular support by the people. They see him as ineffective. They see him as corrupt. But he's just there in place, because all other, popular or alternatives some are in Israeli prisons, some are dead. In terms of having these governance structures, it's been pretty. Palestinian governance structures have been very much in decline to develop other alternatives.
I was speaking with a Syrian refugee to Canada a short time ago. As a matter of fact, he was driving Uber, and it's interesting. As the conversation progressed, I felt comfortable enough, based on what he was saying to me, to ask him if he had hopes or plans one day to go back. Mm-hmm. And he basically was just like, "What am I going back to?"
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine when you look at the state of infrastructure in that region now. You've been talking about the West Bank. I'd be curious for your comment on maybe comparing the two, or how that might compare. But you look at Gaza, you look at the news footage we see, and not just talking about, like you said, you're talking about community infrastructure. I mean, forget about like restaurants and office buildings and apartment buildings, also like hospitals, schools. Like, it's just, it's difficult to imagine rebuilding that infrastructure or achieving any sort of sense of normalcy. Has there ever been normalcy there? You could ask, I guess, but you take my point. Can you foresee that? Like, can you see the region rebuilt?
That's such a hard question. I really don't know. I think Palestinians are very attached to their land, and they wouldn't just abandon it. But is it habitable? I don't think so. It's going to be billions, trillions of dollars in foreign aid to rebuild Gaza, and whether countries actually have the will to do so, I'm not sure. One of the political elements is that extremist Israeli settlers have said that they want Gaza, they want to take it over, develop it into seafront property. That seems to be a fringe, but that is a fringe that Netanyahu is courting. So, there are no answers. And I talk to tons of my friends who are journalists who cover this day in, day out, and the political movements, and they have no idea either. And it's pretty scary that 6 months into this war, millions of people displaced, there is no plan, like there is no day after plan for millions of people.
So let me ask you this in closing. What would be, and first of all, so appreciate everything that you've brought to the table today and sharing insights with us. I know the audience appreciates it as well. What's something that you would have your fellow Canadians focus on or walk with today? There's a lot to process in a conversation like this. There's a lot to process, bigger picture, in looking at this conflict, root causes, future, Western world involvement, et cetera. But what's one thing you might leave us with?
There's a lot.
Yeah.
I think I would say that, it's not too complicated. And there are lots of amazing thinkers and activists who are working to try and, raise awareness about what's happening in alternatives. And I would like Canadians to think more critically about our role in the Middle East and how we can promote peace more. We've been, working towards this two-state, this Oslo plan, and it's getting more and more unlikely with every year, and especially with this war. And I think we should be asking how our trade, how our development budgets contribute to sustaining an occupation that is causing everyone to suffer. It's causing Israelis to be less safe. It's causing Palestinians to be less safe. And I think, if I can leave people with anything, it's spend more time thinking about how that can change, and learn more, and don't be too afraid to engage in these things.
Claire Porter Robbins, a writer and aid worker with experience in the Middle East and the Balkans. You can learn more about her work by checking out claireporterrobbins.com. That's where you'll also find links to it, showing her website right now on the screen. For those of you watching on YouTube, and of course those of you listening on the podcast, know that you can find links to everything we talk about in the show notes. Claire, thank you so much for this. We appreciate you being willing to talk about it.
Thank you. And one final thing, if regardless of whether or not listeners are religious or not, just please send, strength and thoughts and prayers to everyone affected right now. There are still hostages there. There are people that are starving to death. There are people that don't know if they're going to make it to tomorrow. So hold them in your thoughts, please.
Tragic, but poignantly said, Claire. Thank you for that. Thank you for being a part of these conversations, Real Talkers. And as mentioned, we're proud to support independent and freelance journalism, and we're able to do that thanks to our Real Talk Patreon supporters. If you're interested in learning more about making a small monthly contribution to the show, I don't want to call it small, it's huge for us. We appreciate it. And for a lot of you, I know that it comes out of your budget, but it means a lot to us. $5-7 a month allows us to ensure that the people that are on the ground, that are entering conflict zones, that are telling stories that are difficult but important to hear, that those people's work is supported. And so I want to give a big shout out to our Real Talk patrons. You can go to ryanjesperson.com, click on Connect if you want to learn more about our Patreon. I want to get to some of your comments on this interview, and boy, do some of them resonate with me. I feel like you're speaking on my behalf. Others of you throwing stuff out there that we might not think about. We're so grateful for our audience members that tune in live on YouTube or on the Mixler audio app presented by California Closets. This conversation happens because of the support of partners like California Closets, who want to remind you that the consultation, the initial conversation with their designers, is always free. Okay, so you've got nothing to lose checking in with the team. You go to californiaclosets.ca. That's where you can learn more about their custom closets, their systems, the solutions that they have for the entire home. Developed into the most space-saving investment you've ever made. Murphy beds, a big part of how they're turning second bedrooms or home offices into guest rooms and the like. You get the idea. CaliforniaClosets.ca is where you can see what their team of designers and installers can do to transform your experience in your own home. We also want to note that Pathways Alliance, you're hearing more and more about this as we talk more and more about emissions. And that's why Canada's 6 biggest oil sands producers are coming together on a path to reach net zero emissions from their operations. They understand that the global energy demands are changing, and working with governments, provincially and federally. You heard Federal Minister Randy Boissonnault talking about Pathways Alliance here on the show just a couple of days ago. They're building large-scale carbon capture and storage networks that'll reduce emissions from operations, protect existing jobs, and create new ones. Responsibly produced energy is what the world wants, and at pathwaysalliance.ca you can read more about how that is what Alberta can provide. That's pathwaysalliance.ca. Athabasca University is Canada's open university. How cool was that to hear from AU researcher Dr. Srijak Bhatnagar on our Monday, that's April 22nd episode of Real Talk. That was our Earth Day episode where he talked about plastic, the world's plastic problems, and how he believes that microbes could essentially solve it. Johnny, did you come out of that interview with Dr. Bhatnagar feeling better about the state of the planet and the future of humanity?
Yeah, a little bit of positivity there, sprinkled on a bunch of worry.
He didn't pretend like we're out of the woods.
No, not at all.
He didn't pretend like all the problems are solved. But he did provide some fascinating insights.
It was a really good show, yeah.
How we could maybe address those Texas-sized floating plastic islands in the ocean and better clean up oil spills and stuff like that. What I loved is that it also reminded us about the research that happens at Athabasca University. Everybody knows them for their online undergrad programs, their grad programs like their MBA, which I love. That MBA is just a really great option for folks based on the fact that your only commute is to your device and you're determining the schedule of your studies. But also, Athabasca University is a research hub. You can learn more at athabascau.ca. I appreciate the comments on the live chat as we talk to Claire Porter Robbins. I know that conversations like this are heavy lifting because we pay close attention. We don't want to miss anything. We're trying to process it and understand it. Michael's comment resonates with me in our YouTube live chat. Says I'm always hesitant to comment on this conflict. I feel like there's so much disinformation online, and I'm just praying for a peaceful resolution. It's just such a brutal reality, and there is so much suffering. Michael, that's wonderfully said. Others are saying, Bunny Slipper says, diplomacy is going on behind the scenes. We're not privy to it as citizens, nor should we be. Things are being done, but it's so volatile and it has such significant consequences that the tightrope is so thin. Sharon just says, this is heartbreaking to hear. I feel for those children. Amen, Sharon, right? I mean, others of you have said, one of you said, I saw it, and I don't remember where you are in the chat. I apologize. I want to recognize your name, but somebody said this has been going on my whole life, and I'm about to turn 69. And so, I mean, isn't that the truth? Dwayne says, who really wins in war with all this senseless suffering and destruction? Ms. B says, I'm most saddened and frustrated by how citizens are used by governments as pawns, as collateral. Power needs to be viewed like any other addiction. Jordan 390 says, nobody wins in war. Isn't that the truth? You can keep those comments coming. I know that sometimes when you hear an interview like that, it takes a while. You're walking your dog or you're on your commute home or whatever it is, and you're thinking, and then you've got some thoughts you want to put down on paper or in an email, and we welcome your emails anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We appreciate your takes, like this one from Selinger. I didn't share this email with you yet, Johnny, because I thought it was interesting. This was like, I love insights into how people find the show and what they take away from the show. And Selinger wrote in to say, I don't usually take the time to send in comments about anything. And Selinger, I think that's the case with most people. Like most people's lives are so busy, which is why it means so much to us when somebody sits down to hammer out a message. Says, I'm somebody who is certainly very opinionated about a lot of things, but I fall into that category of like not far left or not far right that you claim to be hearkening to on your show. I fully admit that I've not by any means watched all of your episodes on YouTube, but I do try to sit down occasionally and check on what's going on. Thank you, Selinger. We appreciate it. Says, I don't watch a lot of TV anymore because I'm so tired of all the negativity and the fear-mongering from what seems like everywhere. Like no matter which way the program leans. And I start watching or listening, and then I just end up shutting it off because it's not entertaining or informative. Too many times it's just opinion. I get it. Says, but I have to say that I very much enjoyed a couple of recent episodes of Real Talk. The one on hydrogen was fascinating. And then your Earth Day episode on plastics. Both guests were very interesting, very knowledgeable, and they left me hopeful for my children and grandchildren's futures. Music to our ears. Says, I'm so tired of being lectured and scolded with things like climate collapse or political turmoil. Ever since the word pandemic or COVID hit my ears, it slowly but surely seemed to turn everything into a negativity. But lately I see glimmers of hope when you've had guests who weren't coming off as self-promoting, promoting their professions, promoting their businesses, or God help us, their political agendas. It's refreshing to hear upbeat, awe-inspiring, hopeful takes on the future. Smart, real talk. Please have more episodes like that, says Selinger. I completely understand that controversy, especially political, gets people all fired up and tuned in, and you're right about that. And I get that it pays the bills, but I actually felt like I learned something from your hydrogen episode, and I was especially taken with how humble your plastics researcher, Dr. Batnagar, was, and genuinely seemed excited about what he himself could learn instead of preaching to the masses that he knows every terrible thing that'll happen unless, Selinger says, I'll keep listening to Real Talk, looking for what I always do, which is unbiased knowledge, entertainment, and that elusive feeling of the right people are doing the right things for the right reasons. Maybe the inmates aren't running the asylum after all. That from Selinger. I do want to touch on one small thing, and I try to reiterate this as well. Somebody left a comment on, and we try to reply to as many YouTube comments as we can. Some episodes it's just not possible. But somebody came in and said something like they were commenting on a guest of ours, and they said, so much for this unbiased talk show that you claim to host. And I said, there's nothing about Real Talk that is unbiased. Johnny's biased based on your personal experience. I'm biased based on my personal experience. We talked about this
the other day.
But
every single
person has a bias, right?
No
based on your experience. How were you raised? What's your religious belief? What's your political history? What's your life experience look like? Of course you're biased.
I think of all the people we think who try their best to be unbiased. You think of like judges and stuff like that.
Sure.
They still have a past and a perspective and a way that shaped their thinking, and that's embedded in you. It's always there. There's not a person on earth who doesn't have something in the back of their head telling them that this is wrong or right in their opinion.
Yeah, and an unbiased talk show would be completely boring. I understand that where someone says, I'm looking for an unbiased take on, maybe looking for an unbiased take on like how emissions are contributing to climate change, on how, the human role in forest, in wildfires, that sort of a thing. And we'll bring on scientists that'll stick to the data. But then, you'll find that this show might be a little bit different than different than the 6 o'clock news. I don't know if you guys remember, but people used to actually gather around their TVs right at 6 o'clock. They'd stop everything. It's kind of cute when you look back on it. But the news programs, people don't typically, because that's not the journalist or the reporter's job to ask the scientist, hey, based on your personal perspective, how would you influence policy, or what do you think we need to do? They want just the facts, ma'am. Sometimes that's how they approach it. But on a show like this, we're going to say, hey, based on everything you're seeing, like Claire there that talked to us today, based on what you've seen and the people you've talked to and your experience in a particular field or region, what is your opinion on how this could be best addressed? I think that's probably, in my mind, the most valuable question of the entire interview.
Of course. Well, I think the most glaring thing she said was, just talking about Gaza and how people are like, when this is over and when, if Israel moves in there, or if Palestine is forced to rebuild, and she just said, like, that's not going to happen. Like the whole place months ago was rubble. Now it's just rubble on top of rubble. And to rebuild a strip of land like that, billions, trillions of dollars, like, is anyone going to invest in that? It's just, it's a piece of land. It's a piece of the earth that is just going to be uninhabitable, and it's just really sad.
But
looking
also
at all these pictures every day of just bombing rubble, it's over and over.
Yeah, I want to give you credit. I know most people will listen to the podcast on this, but some of the images that you've gleaned for us and some of the images Claire shared with us of this, I
told you before,
they blow me back in my chair, man, when you see them.
Yeah, I don't want to use the expletive, but it's a mind fuck every day going through these pictures of people just going through tragedy over and over and over again, and then like Claire was saying, living in tents for months and then moving again and just being lost. It's I don't.
Yeah, I saw Lauren in our chat had responded when you put one image up on the screen. He just said, "Look at that." He just said it's a gravel pile just sprayed with blood. I mean,
or
it's
this, just people like around, just food falling from the sky, and people just running to fight over it every single time they drop it. And then Claire talking about again, how you've got to check in, and if you're helping people, if you're medical, if you're whatever, and giving your coordinates. And then in my mind, I don't know if this is true. I don't know if that's what she was alluding to, but if you're calling into the IDF or whoever and telling them your coordinates and saying, hey, we're going to help people, like, are they using those coordinates to then bomb them?
Well, that's what a lot of people have been talking about with those World Central Kitchen, the WCK aid workers being killed, was that they were saying, like, and Claire's piece in the Globe and Mail, we'll recommend people read it. She's saying, like, this is where American, UK, Canadian, French governments need to make a real commitment to hammer down on this and to not step away. On bias, Plain Power says, after my medical distress over a decade ago, with the birth of my grandchildren, my bias has changed 100%. says, everybody has bias. It's a human trait. What's more important is being able to move beyond one's bias to grow as a person. There's the bullseye. It reminded me just a tweet yesterday that we got. We had had a conversation with Grand Prairie's Mayor Clayton about a ton of stuff. They're walking away from the RCMP. It's kind of a 5-year transition, but they've just sworn in their new police chief, the Grand Prairie Police Service, the GPPS. A lot of people are looking at this as sort of a case study. They'll keep an eye on Grand Prairie to see how a community can transition away from the RCMP. Of course, the bigger picture here, the Provincial Police Service, the Alberta Police Service. Yeah. But we talked to Mayor Clayton about a ton of stuff, hydrogen in her community and the fact that they have a 0% rental availability and what that's doing to affordability in Grand Prairie, all that kind of stuff. But in my mind, the last 90 seconds or the last 2 minutes of the interview are the most fun and the most hilarious. Where we touch on her comments about 15-minute cities, and you turned that into a YouTube short, which I thought was pretty funny. And anyway, so we tweet about the interview as we do all the time. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Real Talk RJ. She talks about what she's describing as defiant positions coming out of the big cities, right? Like in particular, she highlights Edmonton Mayor Amarjeet Sohi and basically him calling out the province, saying the province owes us $60 million, et cetera, et cetera. And so we put this interview out there, and I like this comment from Morgan. Morgan responds to me and says, Ryan, I do think, and this on bias, by the way, is the context, I do think it's important to have conversations that aren't echo chamber fuel. Thanks for that. However, says Morgan, some of your recent shows have an apologist flavor for the UCP government in Alberta and for Danielle Smith. And Morgan says it might be my bias filter catching this. My political teeth are pretty sensitive. I hope I'm wrong. So I replied and I said, hey, listen, Minister Boissonnault was pretty tough on the UCP just 2 episodes before Mayor Clayton. Boissonnault calling Danielle Smith's Bill 18 bonkers on the show, if you missed it. And I said, and Kathleen Ganley, NDP leadership candidate, was just 2 episodes before that. And then Morgan replies with this, which I think is just wonderful. Says, I make a point of consuming content that sometimes makes me uncomfortable. It's helpful sometimes to test bias by arguing a point from the other side. I think they call that critical thinking, and I haven't always been this way, from Morgan, and I thought that was great. Yeah. If we could describe our audience as critical thinkers, which I think we can, that seems to me to be a winning formula for the talk show that will continue to deliver that real talk and continue to, I think, explore those uncomfortable conversations. I think it's important to do. And then sometimes we just want to head out to the mountains, John.
Oh.
Sometimes we don't want to focus on the news. That's why every Wednesday, courtesy of our friends at Tourism Jasper, we're so proud to present MyJasper Memories. And sometimes we're going to talk about hiking trails. Sometimes we'll remind you that Jasper is the cabin capital of Canada. But every once in a while, I get to talk about my main passion, which is golf. Did you know that the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge's world-famous golf course is getting set to open May 10th? The #1 golf resort in Canada. We'll be ready to accept golfers on the first tee box and then 17 more of them on May 10th. But if you're looking to warm up your golf swing before then, the driving range at the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge, the golf course opens this Saturday. That's April 27th. Open from 10 to 6 daily. It's the perfect way to work on that swing, to aim for the peaks. Unless you're like me, you just figure by watching the Masters a short time ago, your swing has automatically improved. But if not, if you're looking to fine-tune your technique or just get a taste of the greens before the full course opens, make sure you check out their driving range, or you can try their brand new Bears Den golf simulator. It's right there in the clubhouse. It's a luxury golf simulator, as you might expect from them, featuring over 30 unique virtual courses in unparalleled realism. For information on prices and times, you can contact their golf clubhouse. Write this number down, will you? That's 780-852-6090. Or you can email jpl.golfreservations@fairmont.com. Now, thanks to the driving range and the golf simulator, this time of day as well, by the way, or this time of year, rather, I should say, Johnny, Marmot Basin's still open. Buddy of mine was up there last weekend. He told me that the snow was fantastic.
I heard,
The weather was amazing. Because of their elevation, they've still got great snow conditions. So with the golf simulator now open in the Bears Den, you can snowboard or ski and then golf on the same day.
Wow.
The spring skiing, amazing, as said, at Marmot Basin. And they're going to stay open until May 5th. So there are a couple of days to circle on your calendar. You can always check out jaspermountaingolf.com for more information or to make your reservations. Start planning your golf getaway at Canada's #1 golf resort, the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge Golf Course. MyJasper Memories is presented weekly on Real Talk by our friends at Tourism Jasper. Yeah, I see a lot of folks wondering what's coming on a little bit later on this week on the show. Want to let you know, coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to be getting into it. Tomorrow's show, we're going to be checking in. I thought that Mayor Clayton brought some interesting points to the table yesterday. Everybody's talking about politically Bill 18, the Provincial Priorities Act. Her take on it, popular with some, not so popular with others. She was basically like, I think that municipalities need to find ways to better get along or work with the province.
Sure.
She had that one quote in the show yesterday where what did she say? She said something like, working with doesn't mean agreeing with, or something like that. But basically saying that she thinks that the municipalities need to work harder to get along with the provincial government. And some people will agree with that. And other people believe, I think, that it's time that a mayor like Sohi is doing the right thing by really calling out the province and creating a situation where I think he's trying to apply more pressure on the provincial government, or at least maybe get the message out when people, municipal taxpayers, are looking at what their tax rates are doing. Their property taxes rising almost 10%.
That's
almost
crazy.
10% in Edmonton this year. I think the cities are looking for ways to say, our hands are tied, right? Our hands are tied.
Yeah.
So coming up on Thursday, coming up on tomorrow's episode, we're going to get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, she had a lot to. I mean, people were like something. It started off, I was like, okay, agree, and then there were some things, especially to do with the municipal funding. How she said basically, I in my head, I'm biased to that when she said, basically, more money doesn't always fix things, and I said, well, when you're talking about municipalities who need money to just, make their communities better. Yeah. And then she had another comment about how should we be funding the communities that aren't successful?
Yes.
And I was like, well, in my head, I'm like, well, it's because they're starving for money to improve their community. But if you guys want to, go through an interview where you nod your head yes, and then like this the next second, yesterday's interview, but I mean, they elected her. She,
that's April
she's
23rd.
Mayor,
well,
so.
she's a popular mayor in Grande
she's
Prairie.
very popular.
You know what I love about talking to people like Mayor Clayton. Look for our episode if you missed it. It's called "Replacing the RCMP" on podcast or in our YouTube archive. April 23rd. I love that she knows how she feels about something. She comes on the show and she says it, and she, quite frankly, doesn't really care what other people think about it. She has her opinion out there. I get the idea
Feet firmly
that
planted.
Yeah, I get the idea that more money doesn't necessarily fix everything, and that is true. So when she said you can't necessarily solve problems or solve all the problems for municipalities just by throwing money at it, to a certain degree that is correct,
but
and to a certain degree that is incorrect.
We know how stretched thin.
Right.
Communities are right
So if
now.
communities say, listen, we need more, our sewer infrastructure needs to be fixed, or we desperately need to complete a ring road, or we, whatever the case may be, we need that hospital built, then that is a matter then you do need to throw money at it.
Yes.
That is a matter of funding. If, though, and I think people are feeling this way, some people are feeling this way, you believe that a council is ideologically driven in a direction different than what's best for the municipality, or a council, ideologically or otherwise, is straying outside of its mandate. Most people will say, what do you want your city council to do? They'll say, well, we want to make sure the snow is cleared. We want to make sure the garbage is picked up. We want to make sure that communities are growing in healthy fashion. And so what does that look like? There's a lot of councillors, and for that matter, MLAs and MPs as well, that might believe that their mandate extends beyond that.
Of course.
And that's when I feel like some critics of some of the big city councils that we see in Alberta right now are focusing very heavily on things outside of their mandate. And in those circumstances, I think a comment like the one from Mayor Clayton, that you don't just throw money at something, would resonate a little bit more strongly, because some people have lost faith in some council's ability to operate in healthy fashion. I guess the word I'm looking for is dysfunctional.
I tell you, some of the best cities in the world have had a lot of money thrown at them. Dubai's in a desert. It was never supposed to be anything, and it's one of the most amazing places on earth now in terms of
we're
development.
Gonna start comparing
no, I'm
ourselves
not.
to
I'm
Dubai.
just saying. When she said that yesterday, I vehement I was like no, but communities, municipalities around here. Are there any that aren't saying we need more money, we need more services, we need to invest in this and this?
Well,
there's not many that are saying, hey, we're good right
what
now,
municipal or provincial government would ever say we've got enough?
Well,
we're great.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? I mean, you even look at the tone that the Alberta government's taking toward the feds, and sort of one of the part of the impetus behind Danielle Smith's Provincial Priorities Act, or the Stay Out of My Backyard Act, as she's calling it, is that she doesn't believe that Alberta is being fairly funded. This is the popular refrain that we've been hearing for a long time.
Sure.
It's the whole equalization argument as well. And Sean Fraser, the federal housing minister who joined us a while ago, is gone on the record as well, saying, listen, Alberta is like right on par with the funding formula and how it's supposed to go. So this is not a thing. Want to let you know that we do have interview asks in with the provincial housing minister and the opposition, not housing critic, they call them shadow ministers, so the shadow minister for housing. So we've got requests in from both of those. We want to hear both sides of the coin.
Amazing.
We want to hear both sides of the story, obviously, right?
Want to prop up tomorrow's discourse as well. We're going to be bringing you some clips. They had a big show on drought and the upcoming wildfire season. Obviously, Danielle Smith made some comments recently about fires being mostly man-made, which we know, according to stats. We do know that, there are pretty much two instances in which wildfires start. One, nature, either, brush heating up or lightning hitting it. And the other, of course, is people who make mistakes, campfires, cigarettes, leaving hot engines in tall grass or whatever. But she made some pretty not bold statements, but, made a bunch of statements, and I'll wait for the clips tomorrow, but basically Cheryl and Erica going back and forth on, Cheryl saying, it's great that she's saying these things that we know are true, but she wants to hear more of, climate change is real. Here's how we're going to fight it as well.
Yeah. You can subscribe to the discourse, Cheryl Oates, Erica Baruti's, wherever you get your podcasts, or you can find them on YouTube as well. Here's what I want the wildfire conversation to focus on. This is what I think should matter to every single Canadian, and that is not like what percentage of fires are. I mean, it's interesting to know what percentage of fires are caused by humans and what's caused by lightning strikes or other factors. In a lot of circumstances, fires that are still burning and have been burning underground all winter, and that are going to flare up again.
Yeah, people don't
because
realize
we don't
that.
really have the snowpack.
They're still there.
But here's the deal. Just because, and I'm not the expert, right? We get this from talking to people like Dr. Mike Flanagan and others, wildfire experts that have been on the show. But just because a fire may have started by human cause, in other words, a hot exhaust on a side-by-side,
Sure.
Or a cigarette butt,
Catalytic
or a campfire,
converter.
or like whatever, does not mean that, number one, it's not a threat, and number two, that climate change won't factor into the significance or the magnitude of that fire.
And that's, I think, what maybe the premier is missing in these comments she recently made. Climate change is escalating that. When a fire starts now, it burns out of control. It burns bigger. It burns longer. Like you said, they're still underground burning all year long. I think that's the point that's kind of been missing. That's what Cheryl touches on. Erica does her thing, as you can tell, every show. But it was a really good one, just the two of them going back and forth for most of the show about, how everyone is kind of just bracing for what's coming up this summer, which is, I don't know, I don't want to say it, but smoky skies and
get ready,
high
man.
heat.
Every time that we start talking about wildfires, I see in the chat people are like talking about air purifiers, their plan. You don't want to call it, I don't think, the new normal, but I think it also is. I just don't think people like hearing the new normal because then it makes it just sound like we're going to be complacent and accept it.
I'm saying it right now, and it's weird for me because when I first moved here to Edmonton, I never said that every summer. Now I think, when are the skies going to be filled with smoke? You just expect it. It's
Everybody
coming.
just hopes it's not going to be during their outdoor
or
music
a
festival or wedding
or
reception.
when they have time off or whatever, right? Which is kind of selfish, but whatever.
Yeah, very well said. Lightning Rod, great handle in our chat, wonders, Jasper, is it in the cards possibly to have Elizabeth May of the Green Party on to discuss the idea of a national grid tie and Canadian hemp industries? Interesting.
That's pretty cool.
Wouldn't say no. Why not? It's been a while since we've chatted with Lizzie May.
We love hemp.
She'd definitely be be on the docket. Yeah, we could figure that out. Dwayne says the UCP lost Alberta hundreds of millions of dollars by forsaking collecting property taxes from oil companies. That's why municipalities in Alberta must increase property taxes. Well, listen, Dwayne, as we say goodbye today, I'll tell you that that's probably something that's going to come up on Thursday's episode of Real Talk. All right, we're talking April 25th. We're going to check in with our friends at Alberta Municipalities. Now, as we've been forecasting, we expect an announcement from the province on municipal political parties. So we'll get into that, plus other issues of the day. And on Friday, by popular demand, they're back. The Group Chat Roundtable, live in studio, exclusively on Real Talk.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer